So welcome back for part 2 of creating a foreground, midground, background composition in Photoshop. We just added our distant element outside the window of our interior space and brought in the desk with its shadow. And now we're going to turn our attention to the figure in the foreground. So let's see, I've got an extra shadow there. In fact, this shadow that we just created, I think I can adjust the opacity a bit more there. Okay, in fact, to complete the look of that shadow, let's throw a Gaussian blur at it. Go to the filter menu, choose blur, good old-fashioned Gaussian blur. We'll soften those edges of that shadow a bit more. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at our figure. And my poor son, I asked him to do this. He was a real sport to do this for me. I really appreciated it. But I just hung a bed sheet from a door frame and put him in front of it to make it easier to select later. Now it's not perfect because the sheet wasn't long enough, but close enough. Okay, and we don't need the lower half anyway. So I'm going to jump over here and use the object selection tool and see if it'll work. I'm going to click and drag over the figure like that. Hey, not too bad. If that doesn't work, sometimes you can try this. If you go to the select menu, you can choose select subject. Oops. Yeah. And, pretty close to the same thing. Anyway, the object selection tool is pretty handy, especially when you've done the work and kind of put your subject against a neutral backdrop like that. It looks like it may be losing the tip of the dunce cap. I don't want to do that. So I'll get the polygonal lasso tool, and remember, hold down the shift key to add to a selection. I'm just adding the top of that hat back in. And if you needed to, add or subtract, like I can switch back to the regular lasso tool and say I needed to subtract. I'm holding down the Option or Alt key to subtract. And of course, Shift is, what adds to a selection. Anyway, the lower half here doesn't really matter. Right. It doesn't have to be selected just right, but before I move this into my image, I'm going to double check to make sure it's a good selection. Up here at the top of your interface, there's the Select and Mask button. Anytime you've got a selection up and a selection tool active, this button will show up there. I'm going to click on that. And if you look in the properties for this function, there's a view mode, and you kind of need to choose the view that'll help you see most clearly what's going on. In this case, it's a light background, and so if I choose on black, that'll help me see a little better. In fact, I can increase the opacity of that preview. There we go. And if I get in close, I can see, see, there's a problem right here. I need to actually, remove that from the selection, right? In fact, what I'm doing here is holding down the Option key and clicking and dragging through here to add that to the selection. So this is a really good way to kind of preview, make sure that your selection's not going to be awful. In fact, a little further down over here in the properties, you can smooth the image a bit, like maybe smooth it a couple of pixels to make it a little less rough. And you can shift the edge. See, if you shift the edge to the outside, you can see that little, moves the selection away from the figure more. In this case, I want to shift it to the interior so I get less of those edge pixels showing up in the finished selection. So refining your selection with a select and mask option really helps. This isn't perfect, but again, like the upper half is pretty good, and that's what I need to keep. So this will work for now. All right, so I just clicked OK, and it updated the selection a bit, and you can see it moved it a bit to the interior of the figure, right? Not bad. Okay, so I'm going to get the move tool. I'm going to click on him and drag him to my other image here. All right. Oh, now see what I've done. I accidentally drug him into the group with the desk. So if I move one, it's moving both. So I've got to get his layer and drag it above the desk to take it out of that group. There we go. Okay, so he's facing the wrong direction. I think for the composition, he needs to be facing the other way. So I'm going to hit Command T to transform. And remember, if you right click inside a transform box, you can flip things vertically or horizontally. In this case, I'm going to flip it horizontally. All right. And again, with the transform tool, like you can size things up or down, rotate a bit. I think I need to rotate him. I kind of want the top of his cap pointing to the center pane of that window. There's a crack in the ceiling that he needs to be pointing at for some reason. It's appropriate. So when I'm happy with it, I'm going to hit, I'm going to hit return on the keyboard or double click to set that transformation. Okay, so now I've got to try to, get the lighting just right. He's inside in a fairly, dark room, so he needs to be a little darker as well. So we're going to do some adjustment some curves adjustment layers to modify the values in the room, the light, the shadows. So on our protagonist here, I'm going to command click or control click on a PC. I'm going to command click the thumbnail for that layer, right? I'm on the thumbnail. I'm going to hold down command and click that to create a selection from it. So when a selection is made, you can come down to the bottom of the layers panel and create an adjustment layer, right? To adjust values or colors. And in this case, I want to, adjust the value. So I'm going to use curves, which are, I think, the best way to modify values to darken things in this case. All right, so these curves, like you can click and drag on that curve, like add a point on that curve and drag it down to darken things or drag it up to brighten things. So I want to darken it so it looks like he's in this room. Pretty dark. Another way you can do this, by the way, if you got a point you want to get rid of, just grab it and drag it off and you can try again. There's also this guy right here that allows you to click in the image to choose the value that you want to lighten or darken, right? So I'm going to click that and come over here to the highlights on this hat and click and drag down. Oops. Make sure you got it selected. Click and drag down. And somehow I've moved my mask for that layer. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Let me try again. There we go. When in doubt, Command Z, Control Z, undo until it's back to the way that you need it to be. Okay. All right, so that darkened things up quite a bit. Makes him look like he's actually inside, right? So I'm not happy with the color of my figure either. It doesn't quite match the colors of the room. So I'm going to show you a little trick here. I'm going to click on his layer and go to the image menu, choose adjustments, and choose match color. This is great. Like you can choose any layer. In this case, come down to the bottom of the dialog box and choose for the source. This image that we're in, midground room with window, and I can choose which layer, which needs to be, I think, the midground layer. Yeah, that's the one with the interior. And there are lots of blues and greens in this interior space, so I want to kind of have some of that ambient color on the figure. So obviously this is too strong. So I'm going to mess around with the luminance. Maybe lower the color intensity a little bit. Maybe neutralize the color some. Maybe fade it a bit. Okay. So that's looking better. It's looking more like he's got some of the same colors of the interior instead of, looking like he came from a completely different source. So you might try this match color and see what happens. Okay. Yeah, I think the color's better now. All right, so, and here's my curves adjustment, darkening things. Now, I want a little hint of a highlight along the edge here. So I want to point out to you, when you make a selection and then create an adjustment layer, it confines that adjustment layer to that area. And in this case, it makes a mask. See that? I just Option or Alt clicked that mask to show you what it looks like. And so where I had the selection made, it's white, and everything outside of the selection is black. And so if I were to paint with black on that mask, right, I'm going to get my brush out. In this case, I want a soft edge brush, because it's, we're dealing with shadows and highlights. So we'll reduce the size of the brush a bit. All right, so for instance, let me zoom in. If I were to paint with black paint here along the edge, it's going to remove the effect of that darkening shadow effect that I created, right? Because remember, black conceals, white reveals. And in this case, let me back up here. I'm going to Command click the mask to load it as a selection, right? And if I use that brush with black paint, in fact, I'm going to set the flow of the brush pretty low, maybe put the airbrush setting on, so I can gradually brighten things back up, say along the edge here of the figure. Just like, I just want it to look like a little bit of light is peeking around the corner, maybe onto his hand, maybe a fingertip, maybe the tip of his ear here, a little bit of light peeking around the edges. Okay, and so now the hat, because that's long and straight, I'm going to click one spot at the bottom of the hat. I have to make the brush a little bigger. At the bottom, and now I'm going to shift click the top. See that? Let me do that one more time. Okay, and maybe a little bit around the back side here too. Okay, and I turned it into a selection again to confine my adjustment to the interior of that, so I wasn't like painting outside of the edge of the figure. All right, so again, let me deselect that. So now I've got a little bit of a highlight peeking around the edge of the figure. It's more dramatic that way. Okay, so here's another trick. I'm going to load him up as a selection again. I'm command clicking the thumbnail for the actual image, the figure, and now I'm going to hold down Command and Option or Control Alt on a PC and click on my thumbnail for my curves adjustment layer. what it does is it intersects the two. Like any place where those two overlap, now that will become a new selection. And with my selection of just those highlights, I can create another curves adjustment layer. And this time, I'm going to brighten things up to make that even more dramatic. See that? It's really a matter of creating selections and then turning those selections into adjustment layers to brighten things or darken things wherever you need them. Okay, so there you have it. Let me zoom back out here. And while I'm at it, on those adjustment layers, on those masks for those adjustment layers, I'm going to throw a Gaussian blur at those also to soften their edges a bit more. All right, so classic foreground, midground, background, with the idea of compositing the images so that they look like they belong together. And oftentimes that has to do with getting the lighting just right, getting the color just right, and adjustment layers, the adjustment menu can really help you do that. So good luck, work hard, you'll figure it out. Okay, take care.